It has been a while, to be honest, ever since the last time we checked how things were going in the Raid and in Mythic Plus. It's been quite a few weeks, almost a month actually. So I figured it was time to go back and revisit how things are going, because we have received a couple of balance tuning changes in 10.1.7. Also, since the last time we checked, we have gotten some nerfs to some raid bosses. We have also gotten the change to the scaling of the dungeons, and we also got the release of the, for example, planned changes of the specs and their tier sets in 10.2. Maybe we can start looking at some of this with an eye in the future, an eye in 10.2. It won't be long before players start coming back before the release of the next patch and start thinking, okay, how are things looking for this class, for this spec? Should I main this spec in 10.2? How is the situation right now with the spec? Do their changes for the patch, the tier set for the patch looks good? Or is it doomed? Is it Jover? Can we just give up that spec because it's not gonna go anywhere in the next season? This is, we are starting to enter that territory right now. It's still a bit too early, but still, let's go and take a look at how things have been going so far, starting from the raid. And with the raid, we start with the most subjective of ratings, which is the one from u.gg, which shows you, yes, you might have missed it, but actually Red Paladin and Havoc Demon Hunter are S-tier raid specs. Some specs here won't surprise you, like seeing, for example, Augmentation and Shadow Priest doing very well, Unholy, Fire Mage, even Affliction Warlock, Enhancement Shaman, all doing very well. Also, some specs towards the bottom might not surprise you either, seeing specs like Feral Druid, Elemental, Outlaw, Survival, Assassination, those kind of specs, also not that big of a surprise. However, obviously, when we look at actual results and actual numbers, there isn't much of an S tier to be happy about when it comes to Ret and when it comes to Havoc Demon Hunter. We might even give a pass for Havoc because they still have to be brought in the raid because of the Demon Hunter debuff, but when it comes to their own performance right now in the raid, they are definitely still quite weak. Obviously, this wouldn't make sense if we didn't compare it with what we had right before the release of 10.1.7, a week actually before that, which is right here as a comparison. We still see the same few faces towards the top with a few additions. We still have Unholy. Unholy has kept steadfast in the S tier of the raid, which is interesting because when you look, for example, at the sub-creation rating for the raid, even if you just limit it to Mythic, Unholy still supposedly doesn't make the cut to become an S tier spec. The only actually S tier spec raid-wise is Augmentation. So in here we do see Unholy continuing to do very, very well. As well as the major change since the last time we looked is Augmentation itself, because almost a month ago Augmentation was, slowing down a little bit more compared to the beginning of the patch. Now, obviously, Augmentation, and this is the problem, Augmentation still brings other positive things to the raid. So the fact that you can still see Augmentation here, that might be a problem. What also seems even more problematic, talking about looking at in the future, there are no current nerfs planned for Augmentation in 10.2. So in talking about, for the moment, a safe spec to play in the next tier, Augmentation definitely looks like one of the safest of the specs. Talking about less safe is Unholy itself, because Unholy is receiving a significant amount of nerfs to the reason why they are here. And the reason why they are here is because they are the ones getting buffed by Augmentation. They are also the ones getting buffed by Power Infusion. And they have lots of burst. This is getting nerfed in 10.2. They will be doing much higher sustained damage, even higher sustained AoE damage at the expense of losing a whole bunch of burst damage. So they are, even if they're doing well right now, one of the more question marky type of specs for the next season, because their damage profile is going to change by quite a bit. Now, talking about some other positives still doing well, we have Affliction. Affliction is also not getting really nerfed by the changes of 10.2, and they are currently doing quite well. Same goes for the Mage specs. Frost, Fire, and Arcane are basically not getting touched in 10.2, but they are only receiving a change of tier. Importantly and problematically, in the case of Mage, while the tier set is certainly boring and uninspiring, it's very powerful, it's very strong. So this is also, unfortunately, another spec that looks like it will be doing very well in 10.2. Finally, we have a visible buff right here, because before, looking at the changes, we had Assassination all the way down as last. Remember where we complained, why would Blizzard buff Outlaw's damage by 5% if Assassination is all the way towards the bottom? Well, Blizzard also gave a buff to Assassination, and now, out of nowhere, Assassination is doing very well. Now, obviously, in terms of popularity, Assassination has gained a little bit, but it's still a very niche spec together with Outlaw. But of course, any judgments about Rogue, even about their mediocre situation right now, loses a lot of value because they are getting reworked in 10.2. They are the ones whose results right now are the least relevant. It's not like Affliction, who is doing well and is not getting changed, so not much is expected to change. For them, of course, it's going to be a much more important thing, the arrival of the patch, for changing their value. What and who might also be wanting to get the patch to change quite a few things, for example, are specs that have been at this point down here for quite a long time. I'm talking about Balance, I am talking about Havoc, I am talking about generally one or two of the Hunter specs. Last time it was Beast Mastery and Survival. Now it's Survival and Beast Mastery, even after the buffs to Beast Mastery Hunter. They are still down here. There is also Priest. This is a long-running debate about Priest's power in AoE and in Mythic Plus, which has been relentlessly nerfed over time because how meta they were in Mythic Plus, and they have been suffering in the raid. Even if we just move to a pure single target fight, rather than looking at all the bosses, Shadow Priest is still doing terribly. So that's another one that you might want to see do better in the next patch, Shadow Priest, and they're not. And the problem at the moment is that they aren't even getting that many major changes. That might be the more worrying part about Shadow Priest. We could spend a minute or two talking not just about DPS players in the raid, but also healers in the raid. Restoration Druid was given the Grove Guardian's talent change. Now we know why, considering their tier set is all about those new talents. So Resto right now is doing very well, as it often happens deep into a tier where pure throughput, pure HPS specs do much better than previously more meta specs like Paladin or Discipline or Holy Priest. So now they're doing well. The changes in 10.2 are positive. The tier set, it's hard to gauge because it's all around this brand new talent, so we have to see how that's gonna work. Mystery Monk also looks very powerful. They are getting buffed over the entire patch, plus a very powerful tier set, although lots of that power is around 5-man content, Mythic Plus, rather than healing in the raid. It's still looking very good. So as far as healing goes, it's going to be a much bigger of a question mark because Blizzard, as we have an entire video about it, is also planning on changing quite a lot of things on how healers work. So how they are doing now is likely much more irrelevant than how DPS specs are doing now. So we might have way more drastic changes when it comes to healing compared to DPSing because of the big changes going for healers. For DPS, Augmentation is doing very well right now. They are not getting nerfed in 10.2, therefore we can expect to continue to see them doing very well. For healers, the discussion might be a little bit different. Now, for Mythic Plus, we have some funny images right now because we got the extra split of a new patch. This is quite funny because of course now the numbers will look even more skewed. If you look at tanks, in the general population it still looks quite fine with the exception of Brewmaster Monks being sort of still underplayed. As soon as you go into high-ish enough kill levels, we see the new record for a tank, 73.5% going for Guardian Druid. Once more, at all levels, the healers actually look quite nice. It seems like quite a funny joke, but Preservation Evoker is now the lowest played healer in the game. It feels like a fever dream compared to the release of this expansion where preservation was the most popular, but of course you have to take into account the popularity overall of Augmentation Evoker, which is taking a lot of players away from the healing role of Evoker. Once you go, of course, in the very high levels, we have a 68, 69 almost % of popularity of Holy Paladins, with some presence of the buffed 5-man content Discipline Priest for healing. The melee DPS is, of course, as usual, much less relevant. We have some pretty high numbers for a few of the specs, but of course, once you look at the player base, a few days into this patch, it's 1.1 thousand, and then you look at the range DPS and it's 5,000, because of course, as it is visible here, the vast majority of the very high keys are basically just mostly range DPS. Obviously, no surprise, nothing really has changed from this Exodia composition even after the release of 10.1.7, since the patch wasn't actually going to change DPS specs, so the thing is remaining the same for now. It will be, of course, interesting to see how these tiers will change with the release of the patch, given the changes planned to many of the specs. Of course, for both the Raid as well as Mythic Plus, the hope is to start to see some more variety. I have talked about, even though I don't particularly like myself melee players, we have gone quite a long time with a lack of powerful melee specs. Since the meta had been polarized a few months ago by these 3 specs, we have lost a lot of value for many of the melee specs. In a better time, in a better day, we might have seen multiple of these specs being meta and being playable. Unfortunately, they are being right now suppressed by this trio. We will see how much of this will continue in 10.2. I am at this point almost certain that Shadow Priest will eventually drop from this comp. Even though it will hurt to lose power infusion, I think the lack of power of Master Spell being nerfed, as well as the nerf to Mind Soothe, will eventually make Shadow Priest not worth running anymore. The tier being still powerful for Fire Mage, Augmentation not being nerfed will likely continue to keep this combo together in the next season, but at the very least it leaves one more DPS spot. Luckily, hopefully, one of the melee players, one of the melee specs might find more room in the next patch. As I said, when we gave our first look to how the specs were looking based on the changes of 10.2 and the tier sets of 10.2, it wasn't looking too bright for the hope of some of the already very, very meta specs losing their value in the next patch. We mentioned specs like Augmentation not being nerfed in 10.2, Fire Mage not being nerfed and if anything buffed with a stronger tier in 10.2. We also mentioned a spec like Guardian Druid actually getting an equally powerful tier set without being nerfed in 10.2. Same goes for Holy Paladin as well, to a degree. So we will see how will this continue to evolve in the DPTR for now, since, as we have seen, not much is going to change with this comp until the release of the next season. We might still have some ups and downs in the raid, but over the course of the last month we have still seen these specs continuing to perform like this. So it's going to be more interesting at this point, starting to look at the PTR changes for 10.2, the tier set tuning for 10.2, to try to gauge, try to guess which of the specs are going to be worth playing in the next tier. At the very least, if you want to be doing something even, remotely competitive. Like, I really wanted to play Elemental, but should I? Should I really play Elemental in the next tier? Well, what about Shadow Priest? I'm late to the party, I'm late to the flavor of the month train of Shadow Priest. Is it too late now to try to play Shadow for the next season? Have they already played their part in being an S tier spec for a season and now it's time to go and look for something else? That is what is going to be more worth looking over in these upcoming weeks before the release of 10.2. So this is the situation we have right now for both the Raid and Mythic Plus, together with some thinking about the changes coming for 10.2 to all of these specs. Now, I'm going to leave you to the rest of the beginning of your reset. We are starting the farewells as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for helping and contributing to the growth of the channel, which as usual, don't worry, you can do completely for free. You can like and comment down below, to help with the YouTube algorithm as well as subscribing to the channel itself. So with these superfluous things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, okay, 13th of September, only one day away to the end of this heat wave, 33 degrees, middle of September. Please make it end already.